Today, the National Energy Regulator of South Africa came out and said that the country is a great place to invest in the gas market. And this came after petrol price increases by 10 cents a litre last night, and Eskom having previously called for a 16% increase in electricity tariffs, which was later reduced to 8%. Many have said that this is counterproductive for investment in South Africa, but companies like Standard Bank and ICBC have recently invested 20 billion rand into non-renewable energy in the country. We get some in-depth insight into this now with not only Annabelle Bishop, but also joining us is Chris Yelland, Managing Director of EE Publishers. So Chris, I'm going to ask you to take us through your thinking in this space.
I think today NERSA announced their regulated pipe gas prices, and the message that came across was that what is it going to take to really get investment into this gas infrastructure? Really, a lot of investment is needed, pipelines, compression stations, storage facilities, etc. And the answer really is they're really looking for, or the country is looking for and needing a large, credit-worthy anchor customer to make this sort of thing viable. And of course, we look to Eskom for that large, credit-worthy customer, or somebody who is going to buy the gas, use it for generation of electricity.
And just a correction, Standard Bank and ICBC renewable energy. I don't think there's anything like non-renewable energy, but anyway, I don't know, I'm losing my mind tonight on the news desk. Thank you very much for that, Chris. We're seeing argy-bargy between BHP Billiton and Eskom now. BHP saying you've got to honour your contracts. How's that going to unfold?
Look, I mean, you can understand BHP's point of view. We've made a deal, and normally if you have a deal, if it goes against the other party, that means you made a good deal. And in this case, BHP made a very good deal. Eskom and the government at the time made a very bad deal. And it goes against contract law virtually to go and say, now that the deal is very badly against us, we're not going to honor it anymore. If you went and sold a piece of land and the guy that bought it suddenly finds oil underneath it, obviously you made a bad deal, but you can't go back and say, because I made a bad deal, we must renegotiate the deal we made initially. But on the other hand, you can't actually have the others, basically consumers of electricity in the country support BHP Billiton to such an extent. I mean, by some estimates, I think the total sales that they take from Eskom is equivalent to something like Cape Town or Durban, which is gigantic.
Taking into account Chris' comments, Annabelle, your thoughts in the space?
Well, I think it does appear as though they're going to have to let the Billiton contract run its course, and I believe it was instituted in 1992 and runs for about 25 years. So it seems like we've got another few years to go. But I think the grave concern is if you look at where Eskom is heading at the moment. I mean, they're battling to get the Majupi power station to come online on time, and I think that's really turning out to be the trend, that it's costing a lot more in terms of infrastructure spend, and it's taking longer to come online. So I think these are some of the key worries. Obviously, if you look at what's happening with BHP Billiton now, it turns out obviously to be in the wrong decision. But when it was made historically, there was a huge surplus in electricity, and government was obviously looking to use it up. So I think it's one of those situations the government has to be very careful in terms of tying itself into long-term contracts, even now when it's looking at contracts currently, because obviously things can change very substantially over the period.
Chris, you indicated you wanted to add there?
Yes, I think I hear the argument about a contract is a contract, and it's not unsurprising to hear that coming from BHP Billiton. I mean, the chairman is defending a contract that's very much in his interests, but he's also defending a decision that the chairman took when he happened to be the CEO of the regulator, when he approved these contracts. So the matter is now going to be reviewed. NERSA has the power of review. It has the power in terms of the Electricity Act to review disputes between licensees, that is Eskom, and BHP Billiton. Of course they'll say a contract is a contract, but they're not always right, as has been proved.
Has NERSA got the teeth to change the status quo?
Well, I'm confident that NERSA has got the independence and has regularly demonstrated its independence to stand up to powerful monopoly interests. And I think they're likely to hear it and make a ruling. Of course, it can always be challenged in court afterwards.
Chris, and then Annabelle?
My sense is one's got to be careful of that, because at the time it was seen as a very good deal for both parties. Actually, it was not seen, but as you say, the path has run a different course. My big concern is that you set up a contract, and these, in terms of the investment timelines, a lot of projects need long investment timelines, and when you start shifting, those investment timelines start to shorten, and that's one of the reasons why I think we're not getting investment in mining and that kind of thing. It's not through lack of stuff to mine, but the investment timelines are actually shortening, and we need longer investment timelines from that kind of thing. So you say, right, how do you set up a tax regime for the mines? Set it up, it makes sense at the time, and then the prices escalate and say, oh, hang on, we could have set up a different deal, but that's not how you actually get the investment in at the time.
But Chris, at this point, we're only hearing one side of the story.
Yes.
And that story hasn't been tested yet.
Yes.
It's time now for both sides of the story to be heard and to be tested by an impartial, independent agency.
Annabelle, I want your thoughts here. Before it gets too, and then lose the conversation to Chris.
Well, I do think if anomalies are overturned by NERSA, then clearly it is really important to revisit the situation and see whether it is appropriate for it to still maintain in place. And I think, that's the key. In South Africa, we're running it at a very, very, very small operating margin. The electricity, unfortunately, you have a situation where you have, blackouts where you can obviously turn off power to save power. But if you go into a brownout situation, you can go off the grid for 2 weeks, and that's a real problem for the country. So that needs to be avoided at all costs. That's a huge, huge implications. And then you see huge loss in production. Obviously, that comes through in GDP. It starts to worry the rating agencies, and there are so many implications. So, for the good of the country, and if obviously there are anomalies that are found to be in that contract which are inappropriate, then clearly it does need to be revisited.
Viv, you're sitting there a little quietly, and you're watching with great interest and listening with great interest.
But also, we mustn't forget, we mentioned the fact about natural gas. Look internationally, Israel has this Leviathan project on the go, looking to have natural gas being a huge focus. The US, etc., is looking for natural gas. While we negotiate past supply, past infrastructure, etc., we must also remember that we need to get new infrastructure in place. There are new technologies coming into place. I know people are saying fracking in the Karoo may not be there, or may be there, but there are new sources of energy out there. Not renewable, some of them may be a bit polluting, etc., but they're a bit better than coal. Coal is about the worst thing you can do. And we should not just take our eye off the ball and just look at the power supply. We actually have to look at reinvesting in the sector, redoing our grid. That's a huge issue in this country. Our grid is old, it's decrepit to a certain extent. We also need to redo our production. There's much better ways to do these things nowadays.
Well, where are we? We're Wednesday today, aren't we? A final point from you, Annabelle, before we close out on this discussion, and then to you, Chris. So, Annabelle.
I think, looking maybe at a broader macro perspective and moving away from some of these specific topics you look at, I'm feeling increasingly positive about the global economic outlook. I think we're seeing better figures coming through in the housing market in the United States. We're seeing obviously improvements coming through from China, and even the PMI figures, which I think were misread in the United States, clearly are showing some improvement as well. So I'm actually looking a lot more positive on the outlook for the South African economy. I'm expecting GDP growth of 3%, and I think that is actually above the consensus at the moment, which is close to about 2.6, 2.7%. And I think from that point of view, we could actually see a slightly brighter outcome for 2013 than is currently being expected. And that obviously has benefits for the Rand, because remember, the Rand is seeing some negative re-rating against the global outlook, because we're looking to potentially perform worse at the moment. So from that point of view, I think we could potentially move closer to our fair value in the currency this year as well.
Nice to have some positivity on the desk. I'm going to silence you at this stage. I don't want you to shoot us down at this point.
I would concur with that.
Would you? This is fantastic news. Everybody looking on the brighter side.
One's got to be careful that there can be shocks, but it does look like if we can settle our labour and all the rest of it, that we can actually generate higher growth.
And finally, Chris.
And on the energy front, I agree with you. We shouldn't just be looking backwards. There are great opportunities going forward. Gas opportunities in Mozambique, a massive investment in a new industry, new infrastructure that can really change the game. It can make fracking in the Karoo obsolete if we can bring in natural gas at much lower prices. So I also think there's great reason for optimism in the energy front.